If you look over the last 100 years or so, land has appreciated at a rate of 6.75% to 8.5% historically on a per annum basis. That's a pretty good return, and that's part of the stability that we see in land valuation long term. How does that look on your balance sheet over a lifetime versus what are the implications on cash flow here today? A lot of the farm operations we get an opportunity to work with will sit there and say, land never made sense on paper. It's never cash flowed. And these are guys that have farmed for 30, 40, 50 years. But the reality is, over the last 30 or 40 years, we haven't seen.
Shay, welcome to the Land Podcast.
Thank you very much.
We're punting outside of our coverage today in a couple different ways. I often describe myself as just a dumb deer hunter, but there is so much more to land, and you have a lot of experience when it comes to agriculture. So I want to dive into kind of that sector. Obviously, it's tied to land. A lot of rec farms have tillable on it. So that's kind of my motivation behind part of this conversation. But you do a lot of things, and I will butcher it if I give you the elevator pitch for you. So why don't you just tell the guest who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on. I bet you're a smart deer hunter because I know you well enough. I've seen all these pictures of big deer. But no, I appreciate that. So part of my time where we're sitting here today is with Monier Seed. It's a side of our business that we help serve people that are deer hunters, soybean farmers, small grains, and that's been a great part of our business. It's been part of the legacy for over 100 years on my wife's side of the family. So it's neat to look back at that history. As part of that, we do farm here in what I would call Northwest Illinois, depending on how you divide up the state. I'm not an Illinois native, so I divide up the state north of Peoria here, about 30 miles. And so have a farming operation. We put cover crops on every acre and grow seed soybeans for our business, and then some identity protected crops, non-GM corn, white corn, things like that. And then in my spare time, or on the other 50 to 55% of my time is spent doing agricultural consulting. So we work with farm operations on things like transition planning, business structuring, cost of production analysis, and then we actually do peer group facilitation and things like that. So it's a great fit when you look. We were talking earlier about how the cycles of my season work. So when we're busy farming, and then in the normal off season of farming, we're doing the consulting work, and we help operations across the United States and Canada on those different areas. We were just out in Phoenix for the conference that we put on every year for 150 producers, and you get all those smart farmers, smart deer hunters in the room. And it's amazing the networking that occurs there and kind of the brain power that fills it. So that's a pretty good overview of what I do.
Yeah. So let's just rip the Band-Aid right off. What is the status of the Midwest agricultural economy? Because you read headlines, coffee talk shop. The market seems pretty bearish right now. Is that what you're seeing amongst the peer groups? Like, are farmers struggling right now, or is it more status quo? Are they holding water? Like, where is it at? Like, where's the truth behind the headlines right now?
It's a little bit of everything. And the first thing I would say to answer your question is there is a segment of the population that's struggling. There's a segment of the population that's kind of right at break even, doing well. And there's a segment of the population that is succeeding, the planners, those who have prepared for these times that we're experiencing now. To give some perspective on it, let's go back. The question was asked here beforehand is, hey, these are some of the same prices that we were seeing in the 1980s, and look at what land has done, your input costs, everything relative to that. Well, it was also a different time of production. So the big issue that we faced here, 2023, 2024, 2025, as we record here today in January of 2026, is massive crops from a production standpoint. So when you weigh that supply versus demand, huge amounts of supply, prices have tanked. This is coming off of a period of record profitability in 2021 and 2022, though. Part of that was a global supply and demand thing. Part of it was a weather outlook. So, overall, I would say that the media right now is maybe portraying a picture that feels a little worse than what reality is. The outlook is bleak in a lot of scenarios, though. When we look at cost of production on corn and soybeans, We are about $1.50 to $2 below the cost of production on soybeans right now. Really ugly climate for soybeans as we head into 2026. Corn is a loss of $5 to $20 an acre. So, -3, -5% ROI there. Those aren't beautiful outlooks.
What was the profitability like in the good years, 21 and 22? Was that just for rough metrics? Because I feel like every business has cycles, right? There's retractions, there's growth periods. And so what we're feeling now, and you mentioned some are actually doing well, and maybe those folks harvested profits and got ready for a potential drawback in the market. What was, for reference, if corn's losing $20 an acre in 2022, as just a general rule of thumb, was it making $100 an acre, $150 an acre, $50 an acre?
200, 250, 300. So you were looking at 20%, 30% margins for a lot of farm operations in 2021 and 2022. You got to remember, though, that's on a regional basis. So you had people that got hit with, really bad drought, yield issues there. And then likewise, you had people with excellent production that, had once in a lifetime career changing opportunities there. So it's this tale of the haves and have nots based on weather, and there's so many good producers out there. Over a historical context, one thing that I would just add for your listeners, though, especially for those that are landowners that work with tenants, is when you go back, and we have some really good data on this in AgView Solutions, when you go back over 15 years, you look at overall profitability of corn and soybeans somewhere in that 12 to 14%. Take out government subsidies or disaster relief, insurance payments, things like that. You take off 8 to 9% of that profitability. And where does that leave you? 3 to 5% margin.
It's a bad business.
It's a tough business to be in. Now, again, how do you manage that? How do you manage your cost? There's a lot of factors that goes into it, but I just thought I'd provide that for a frame of reference.
Yeah, that is interesting. So you said things are bleak for the outlook. Most of the folks that listen to this have aspirations of owning land. I mean, it's kind of the full spectrum. I would say we typically cater towards the recreational land buyers, but I know there's people that want to run pasture. I know there's people that want to buy land to farm. What does your crystal ball say? Go ahead and just pull it out and tell us what's going to happen.
I forgot to pack that today. I would say there's short-term outlook and then there's long-term outlook. When we go back, university numbers would indicate, and then I've actually done some research on this with some tools that we developed. If you look over the last 100 years or so, land has appreciated at a rate of 6.75% to 8.5% historically on a per annum basis. That's a pretty good return, and that's part of the stability that we see in land valuation long term. And how does that look on your balance sheet over a lifetime versus what are the implications on cash flow here today? A lot of the farm operations we get an opportunity to work with will sit there and say, land never made sense on paper. It's never cash flowed. And these are guys that have farmed for 30, 40, 50 years. Now go back 2-3 generations, their story is in our farm operation here where they bought a farm and paid for it in 3 years. Different climate, different times, different outlook on fiat currency and debasement. There's a lot of things that we could go into there. But the reality is, over the last 30 or 40 years, we haven't seen land that cash flows on purchase. But they've always found a way to pay for it. So it's always come over the 15, 20, 30-year terms. You get the land paid for, you figure out what the benefits are on the back end for the balance sheet, and now you have people that have built an incredible amount of wealth over a lifetime that has opportunity to last for generations. So my short term is farm profitability tracks pretty closely with land valuations in the short term. So currently, as we sit here at the beginning of 2026, I think we're in a period of land buying opportunities from maybe a slightly softened market. I know there's several land reports that have come out here over the last couple of months that would indicate on a regional basis, land prices have softened maybe 2 to 5%, depending on locale. And at the same time, you got data centers, you got wind, you got solar that are impacting specific regions. But I actually think as we sit here today in 2026, there's some good land buying opportunities over the next couple of years before we start seeing an increase due to some of these outside pressures.
Do you think that when do you think what would be the catalyst to get commodities to where things are profitable again?
Okay, so it's a supply issue, it's a demand issue, and right now it's both.
Right.
Part of the demand outlook is for a long time, China did not buy any corn from us. And then we had a period of time over the last decade where they started buying corn. That was huge for our export program and some demand there. And we've actually seen strong corn export demand through 2025, actually record export demand through 2025. But part of that is because we were cheap relative to the world price. And now we're sitting here with this massive supply. I mean, a record crop to the tune of 6-7 bushels to the acre. And just for reference for some of the listeners that may not be familiar, when you look at a national yield across 86, 87 million acres of corn produced in the United States with a yield of 178 to 181 in 2024, in 2025 we came in with 97 million acres. Or excuse me, I should say 87 to 91 million acres in 24. In 25, it was 97 million acres with an average yield of 186 bushels per acre. That's a massive difference. And 2024 was a huge crop. So we've had 2 years with huge crops, decent demand, but just not enough. And from an internal demand standpoint, we got reduced cattle numbers. And we have ethanol that's basically flatlined. So where do we go with all this product that we're producing? Farmers do what they do best. They grew really good crops, and now we're sitting here at a time of volatility. So it's the ethanol demand that we need. It's the export demand that we need. The other thing that's going to trigger it is when do we have weather issues? As we sit here today, the South American crop is looking pretty good. So, may not have a drastic outlook. It's really going to depend on what we see over the next 6 months in 2026.
Lot to unpack, but I feel like that's a pretty good check-in from someone that obviously follows it very, very closely. And so I feel that I would agree that it seems like there is and has been some buying opportunities, once again, depending on location, depending on who are the neighbors, depending on the sales method, all those different things. Money has gotten a little bit cheaper, so that's good. Yeah. We'll see what happens throughout the remainder of the year. But when did you first realize land isn't just an asset, but it's a business, a legacy, and honestly, a way of life? I know you decently well, and it seems like your life is rooted in land in some form or fashion. So when was there a moment with that? I knew you grew up on a farm in Iowa, but was there a moment where you're like, oh man, this is more than just numbers and spreadsheets. It's XYZ to you?
I think it's a cultural thing. How were you raised? Who taught you? And I remember both of my grandparents, both sides of my family really stressed the importance of the land because their family had developed the farm operations. So think of my grandpa's dad through the 1940s. He got back from World War II. He bought land. He bought his first tractor, and he built the farm operation into what it is today. Likewise, on the other side of the family, cattle operation, row crop operation, their parents built it into what it is today. So I just remember having those conversations growing up where they said, this is about more than me. It's about more than my kids. And guess what? It's about more than you too. Because this is generations of wealth. It's generations of management. And by the way, you're going to be gone someday, and then it's about your kids. And so it was instilled at an early age, just in conversation, but also in the management methods. And this is something that not everybody agrees with. From do you till the land? How do you fertilize? What are your management practices? And that's okay. I was raised that we want to conserve soil, we want to conserve water, we want to protect the ground, we want to, have some sort of harmony with the wildlife too. And my one grandfather on my mother's side, he had been doing no-till and strip-till practices today for over 40 years. I mean, he was one of the first adopters as you look at the late 1970s into 1980s when he really grew the farm business, and no one else was doing that type of work. So he looked at fertilizer use efficiency. He made sure that the most valuable asset of that top, 6 to 8 inches of soil wasn't running away. And to see that and to see how passionate he was about it, that's when it really clicked with me that it's like, hey, this is a long-term thing. And then, as my faith kind of developed, maybe middle school into high school years, I realized there's a lot more at play here than just what we control in our brief time. And that's powerful.
Mm-hmm. You're exactly right. I feel like we're in relating back to deer hunting. It's like, what about this season? What about this season? Well, what about 10 years from now? What about 20 years from now? What can you be doing now to be setting up, even if you're not still the owner, like what can you do now to have a positive impact long term? Because I feel like as humans, it's all about extract. Well, how can I get ahead? How can I get something out of this? And I think when you step back and look at it with a longer time frame, that's where a lot of progress happens. And obviously, same thing for farming.
And we just had one of the speakers at our conference, Vance Crow. He does a podcast called the Egg Tribes Report and the Vance Crow podcast. Phenomenal information. One of his things around communication is when you hear somebody say something or do something that's different, it gives you pause. And so you talk about humans being an extraction method. So when you come across someone that's doing something different, it just like makes you stop and think, and that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's right. That's a good idea. This is probably how it's supposed to be. And it's refreshing. It's enlightening to meet other people that are doing those things.
What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions to farming that you hear and want to debunk? And I'm just talking about people drive by fields and around here every single day, no matter where you go, you're driving by a field. And so I feel like people have these maybe misconceptions or don't fully understand fully when it comes to farming that you wish they knew, or what's something like this. What grinds your gears? Or like, well, people think this, but it's really X, Y, Z. And
I wouldn't say it grinds my gears because you don't know what you don't know. And I know I know this much, if that, right? Especially about other industries. It is kind of interesting though when you talk to people that you grew up with, or even younger generations now, that they don't know the difference between corn and soybeans. Something as basic to me as a farmer as earth and water, and it just goes to show the disconnection and what's going on around you in the environment. And I would be the same way, by the way, if you dropped me into a deer food plot, or how the timber's set up, or management zones, and how you kind of track movements and pattern of life type of deal. I would be the exact same way. I think what's important to recognize at a baseline level, though, is there are so many people that care about the management of the land, and that should never be lost in translation. Now, it doesn't mean you're doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. I care about a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that I'm doing them the right way. And what does right look like over the course of 50 years or 100 years? Well, that's why we do the management practices that we do today, because I want my great grandkids to look back and be like, you know what? I think he was doing the right thing. So my message there, I guess, to not get too sidetracked, is what I want people to know is there are good land managers out there. We do care about the environment. We don't want to have any impacts on the environment or the wildlife or water quality in a negative way. But there's also a sense of accountability and responsibility that if you realize something's happening, you better make a change.
When did you make the decision to cover crop all your acres?
Pretty early. So I came back into the farming operation in 2019. We did some pretty extensive trials in 2020, 50% of the acres in 2021, and then we've been 100% since then.
Based off of what results? Because obviously you tested.
It's based off of soil loss. It's based off of nutrient movement in the soil, and basically having ground cover. So there's 6 principles of kind of soil management out there, and a couple of them that are important to me is always having ground cover, always having a living root, and trying to keep the resources and fertility that you put on in place. Right place, right time, right amount, right application. So I think really focusing on those 3 allows you to keep what I consider the major principles in mind, and it makes me feel that I'm doing the right thing for what I've been entrusted with, for the landowners that I work with, for my family's like my father-in-law, the ground that they own that we've been entrusted to care for now as we've transitioned fully into the farm business. And there's some neat things out there. I just briefly mentioned that we're doing a 800 acre trial, right? So we basically went all in on taking Austrian winter peas and planting them on 30 inches with the planter, so that we can come back in the spring and plant corn between it. And we'll let the peas keep growing to fix nitrogen. And then you got a living root, you got a living plant, you got ground cover out there. I don't know anybody that's doing that, but it seemed like a good idea. So I was like, let's try it and see what we can learn this year. I think just going out there and having those at bats and trying new things, and probably for your listener too, when it's management of property or timber or land
Everyone's
or deer.
always testing.
It's like, man, it's fun, and people are so scared to test sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Probably less implications on our testing than what some of your research would be on the different pieces of ground. I give you a check for $1 million. You have to buy ground.
Yep.
What and how do you evaluate a piece of land? What are the first few things that you look into or look at?
Yep. So from an owner standpoint and an operator standpoint, those might be two different answers, which I'll try to come back to here full circle. If I'm the operator and owner of that land, I'm going to be farming it. Personally, I'm going to look at Class B or Class 2 soils. So maybe not your top productivity index if you're Illinois or CSR or whatever management system that you use there. I want to use a mid to lower tier because I know that I can improve those soils for crop production capacity. And this has kind of been proven over the last 30 or 40 years, especially with higher levels of management, that if you get good tile drainage in there, if you have access to water, and you have strategic variable rate nutrient applications, you can make those Class B soils just as good as Class A. And actually, we saw this in 2025 where some of the higher productivity index soils were getting their socks knocked off by maybe the 110 PIs or 85 to 90 CSRs because they had different water holding capacities, different characteristics. And from a leveraging standpoint, if you can go and buy land at maybe 10%, 15%, quote unquote, discounted off of a 140 PI soil type, those are real dollars. $1 million doesn't go as long as you might wish it would.
Maybe get an 80, maybe.
maybe a 60 or a 50.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it'd be a 60.
I really like to, from a landowner standpoint and even an operator standpoint, part of our outlook is where are those 40 to 60 acre pieces that are maybe smaller, maybe haven't had the best management in the past that can be improved, that you can continue to put some effort into, maybe do some timber cleanup, maybe have adjacent properties. I always think access to water for both wildlife and or groundwater is pretty important. So
when you say access to water, are you picturing like center pivots or are you picturing just a creek system that runs on the east side of the farm or something, for example?
I like both. Yeah, I think both are good. And we're sitting here in an area that, it's very sandy for 15 square miles around us here because we're in a former floodplain. Well, we have irrigation access from, shallow enough wells. You go 10 miles west of us where I live and you're drilling a lot further and, water just isn't feasible at that standpoint. So I think that it just needs to be part of your consideration. What's your operating radius? Where do you feel comfortable purchasing that land? And, maybe where's long-term value on that too?
If you want to know where property boundaries are for public or private, you want to develop a great plan for your farm, document perfect access to a blind, to a tree stand, carve out and measure food plots, connect your Moultrie trail cameras to an app that shows exactly where they're at, and you can look at the feed for that specific camera location, then Onyx is something you need to check out. It is the only mapping software I use when it comes to deer hunting. I've tried other pieces of software, different apps, and I always go back to Onyx because I think it is the most comprehensive, easy to use, and robust mapping software there is when it comes to hunting and land ownership. You want to send a pen to a friend, boom, send it to them right to text, opens it up. Maybe you have notes, maybe you have pictures on that pin, transfers all of it. You want to send a whole entire folder of a plan that you mocked up, you can do that on Onyx. So be sure to check out Onyx. They are a huge supporter of the Land Podcast. They allow us to travel around and talk to some folks that can give you really good insight and good information no matter where you're at in your process of buying land. Let's get back to the conversation.
Mm-hmm. How long does it take to, let's say you find a farm that's, 115 PI, let's say 115 PI, it was used and abused. How long does it take to get that farm fixed?
How much money are you willing to spend? Because
both answer both. Yeah.
Yeah. If let's say you just go in and you change management practices, you add some cover crops, maybe do some strategic tillage on areas that were super compacted. You really need 3 to 4 years to get a really good turnaround, kind of depending on what the rain and freeze thaw cycle does, at least where we sit here in Illinois. Now, if it's a wet farm, or if it historically hasn't produced because it needs terraces from slopes or whatever it may be, something that I want to mention from a landowner perspective is if you're able to get land bought at a discount, quote unquote, or you feel that it's a good price, and you're year one and you want to, what can I do in year one to have the most impact? Invest in some of these bigger projects. Invest in waterways. There's cost share programs out there. Invest in drainage tiles so that you and the tenant of your property benefit. If it's if you're using it for row crop production, or maybe it's putting up fence, or maybe you got a young couple that wants to come in and graze and do something like that. There's opportunities to make improvements in year one that are going to pay you back for 30 years, 50 years. So I just encourage people to don't get hyper focused on the cost of some of those projects up front if they're going to continue to pay you for the rest of the time that you own it.
How long does it take? I know it's situational and it would depend, but let's say you had a farm that had no tile. What's the typical break even on something like that? To where, I don't know, $1,000 an acre to put in tile. That's going to increase my yields, across the board. Is it a 7-year break even? Is it a 10-year break even? A 3-year break even? As just and you can answer with a range.
So if the price of corn is $4.50, you're spending $1,000 an acre. You need roughly 230 bushels over what period of time to pay that back? We've seen farms that you can take 30, 40, 50 bushel increases in 1 year. Just by managing that water and having a good season. And then the other thing is you pair 30 bushels for 4 years against 450 corn. And then in that 5th year, corn goes to 750, and now you're 30 bushels ahead on it. Well, now you're a 5-year payback, or a 7-year payback, or a 10-year payback. And something that, we have offered on land projects just personally in our farm operation that we've seen a lot of successful clients do is they will cost share tile installation with the landowner, or maybe they'll do the tile installation and the landowner just pays for the cost of the pipe, or some variation of that, maybe a flex rent schedule. There's really creative and interesting ways to make that work for everybody involved. But to specifically answer your question, 7 to 10 years pretty much is a no-brainer for tile payback. And my grandpa always said, you pay for tile whether you have it or not. and that's stuck with me from a very young age. You're gonna pay for it, buy once, cry once when it comes to writing the check for the tile, and then you're gonna get it back over the course of time.
Have you researched any of the implications of all the tile we've laid down in terms of like diverting water? And I mean, that's a pretty hot topic.
Oh yeah.
I mean, very hot topic, because obviously, to your point, you make your living farming, and then the other end of it's like you're diverting all this water and a million other things. I can't speak eloquently on it because it's not my area of expertise, but what's either your rebuttal or your thought? Because, you made mention about being a good steward of the land, where it's like, all right, we'll just pump all this water right over here.
So there are millions of miles of underground tile just in the state of Illinois.
Yep.
Millions and millions of miles. I yesterday drove through Iowa. Iowa is a swamp, wetland area, and about 60% of the state when it was first, explored and settled.
Before all the prairie went away.
Yeah. and it's interesting to think about, because you drive by and what do you see? Corn and soybeans.
Yep.
You see corn and soybeans just as far as the eye can see. To answer your question, I think there are huge opportunities for strategic tile management systems that exist today to where you can actually close off that flow of water and repump water back up into the underground systems, or stop, so that you don't have that massive watershed inundation. You get some of these flooding events, you get higher runoff from a fertility and nitrogen standpoint. There's huge opportunities to install systems that are much smarter than what we're doing today. I do not think that personally, that grid tiling, where you're putting in a 4-inch or 6-inch tile line every 30, 40, 50, 60 feet is the answer for every acre. There's some, there's a field that we had tiled 2 years ago. Landowner made the investment in that. And it was a perfect farm for it because it sits up kind of on a plateau. We don't have plateaus here, but plateau, if you will, water drained into that field, was really hard to get off. It's a very flat field, 5-6 feet of rise across 140 acres. And that's the farm that's a candidate for good tiling. And we've seen really dramatic yield impacts by doing that. The farms that are more rolling maybe have a better opportunity for some of that water to get away. You're going to have some more variability in the soil types. There's huge opportunities to tile the areas that need it. Don't get rid of water in the areas that do need it. And maybe even put in a controlled management system so that in the years like 2021, 2022, or 2012, if you go back that far, you just shut that tile off and tell the water you're going to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the tile that's been laid is not going to come out of the ground. But I would say if you're a new landowner and you're looking at it, just ask your tile person. Say, does it really need to be pattern tiled, or can we tile strategic areas? Tile does not have to be a one and done project. You can do it over a course of many years. The GPS coordinates are perfect now to where you can basically go out there with a backhoe, find the existing lines that you put in 10, 15 years ago and add on as you feel that you need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The tile. I know, Richard, that was probably a question or the thought that you had. What do you see as an expensive mistake that someone can make as a new landowner? And maybe it's not making those improvements that make an impact for years to come. Is there anything else that jumps out to mind? Obviously, on both sides, in-laws and the family you grew up on, very farming centric. I'm sure land was talked about at the dinner table all the time. Was there anything that you picked up that maybe the general public wouldn't necessarily know?
The person who's willing to pay the highest cash rent is not always the best tenant. And I don't mean that as a negative way, because we work with very successful operations that can write their big checks because they have an owned land base. So, if you got an owned land base that you have principal and interest payments of $100 an acre, you can go out and offer $450 an acre because that brings your cost average on a per bushel basis down to, $215, $220, which is still well below what most people are paying from a cash rent standpoint. So choosing the right tenant is extremely important, because if you have someone that comes in on a 3-year lease and doesn't treat it properly, basically does that resource human extraction that you're talking about, now you're 3 years of degradation, you're 3 years to build it back up, and you have a ruined relationship. Mm-hmm. So find the right people if you have someone operating on the land. Aside from that, just going back to the mistakes that people make is not making some of those larger land improvements sooner. Especially on the ones that are going to pay you back over time. So, if there's areas that need tiled or whatever, you got a good operator in there. They want to make the right decisions for you. Invest in the operator, invest in the land, and let it pay you back over time.
So this is your personal opinion. Is this is what I want? Can you overpay for land, knowing there's the 6.75 to 8% of annual appreciation? Time hypothetically would heal all deals if you could weather a storm long enough to where it makes sense. But yes or no, can you overpay for land?
Yes, there are people that are cash flow negative right now because they overextended on principal and interest payments on land. Mm-hmm. And now, what's your options? Do you sell the land? Do you give up rented acres? Well, you can't give up rented acres or the owned land because your contribution margin goes down. Now all of your other expenses and the equipment and infrastructure that you have go up by 20% or 30% if you try to let go of 20 or 30% of your land. So it's a long-term strategy on what can you cash flow as a farm operator owner, and you as a landowner, you have to look really closely at what you can cash flow. And P&I has been pretty ugly from a payment perspective here recently. I mean, $900 to $1,000 an acre on an annual basis, especially when most of that's going to interest on a 25, 30-year note for the first 7 to 12 years. It can get ugly.
The principal and interest table is always really ugly when you start looking at that of how much really goes to principal for the first 5 years versus interest, and the front load of that is ugly. If you overextend or something like that, it's like, well, man, I've been making payments for 5 years, but how much of a shovel have you really been able to dig out in terms of getting the principal down?
One thing that probably 3 or 4 months ago, I was looking at that exact scenario. We had some questions come in on like early payments, if you want to make early payments on principal and what impact does that have? Well, you always hear the bankers talk about that. And yeah, that's good long-term, but it was very hard to visualize. So I built a 30-year mortgage calculator that essentially allowed you to plug in interest payments or principal payments additional at any point in time. And it's amazing. You put in like 3 or 4 extra principal payments in the first 7 years, and it's saving you hundreds of thousands on the back end.
Yeah.
And so just to visualize that and say, okay, now you're going from a 360 month, term loan to 280 or something like that. It's like, all I had to do was make 4 extra payments, and nobody's talking about that.
Yeah. No, I think I nerd out on that stuff too all the time. I really do. I was actually just doing it on ChatGPT yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great piece of advice, even for the rec land buyers, or, even people with a house, mortgage, or God forbid a vehicle loan. Those all make a really big impact. What do you? I feel like people are always wanting. It's interesting because people are like, oh man, if land crashes, like that's what I'm going to buy. Was that something that has been communicated to you from generation to generation, or is it just like you kind of got to take the swings that you get an opportunity at, because timing things perfectly? Like if the world's on fire, are you going to take the gamble in order to buy land? Like, what's your thought process with that? Because everyone's just like, man, these prices have been crazy. They're going to come down. I know they're going to come down, and I'm not as convinced because there's so much interest in all forms of land at this point, and there's way more money out there than any of us can really fathom.
So there's a couple things that I want to answer in there. The first one is, I think there's been one major incident that land has actually come down, and that was in the 80s. You had a significant drop off. There's been some areas that have certainly had softening. Kansas, a few areas in South Dakota here over the last 2 or 3 years that you saw land get up to $6,000, $8,000 an acre, which is double what going rate was, and a lot of that's come back down now. But again, regional basis, regional money. What's it connect to? Who's going to buy it? So I think that was, interesting to see here. But yeah, I mean, it's happened one time essentially over the last 100 years where you saw a major price reduction. I think there's opportunities. And again, that's what I referred to earlier when you look at periods of farm profitability tracking closely with what land valuation is. So now that we're in another quote unquote recession or fall off in farm profitability, similar to what we saw in 2014 through 2019. It's about a 5-year period there. Things were maybe just a little bit softer. And then, I built a land cost or a land purchasing tool to kind of analyze some of this stuff in 2021. And I sent out like 1,000 of them. Like 1,000 people emailed me and asked me for that because land was hot. There was money being printed left and right.
Money was cheap.
Time
of uncertainty, hyperinflation. Perfect storm for land values to do what they did.
I hope we never see that again. Yeah, I say that joking. If you're the owner of the asset, of course you want to see that again at some point in your lifetime. So the second answer to that is just evaluating every opportunity. Evaluate and do the math on every opportunity and think about what that means for your operation. At the conference here this last week, I had a guy that is in South Dakota. He had an opportunity in 1996 to purchase 4,000 acres. And if he had done that, his balance sheet would have looked worlds different what it is today. But he said, I didn't want to have my dad sign on it, and I didn't really do the full math on what that would look like long term. And so I passed on it, and we're fine. The operation's done very, very well for him in the meantime. But he goes, that was a life-changing opportunity that you don't have many of those come along today. Mm-hmm. So just evaluate every opportunity is the second thing that I want to say on that. And then the other thing is, are there unique strategies? So is it, leasing for hunting? Is it farm tenant? Is it being able to section off, parcel off some of that land and sell to someone else that's adjacent? And then access to capital has been a big thing for a lot of farm operators. And so it's looking at, are there equity capital opportunities out there for you to take, ownership positions in land that you currently own or that the family's owned over time, to gain access to that capital used as a down payment. Now you have 2 properties that are appreciating in value instead of just one. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's been some unique things here that have presented themselves over the last couple of years in that field as well.
Yeah, I was on the phone last week, and someone I have a lot of respect for, and he's like, it's real simple. Buy as much land as you can afford, but I emphasize afford.
Yeah.
And I feel like to really oversimplify it, pretty good advice.
The interesting point that we're in today is what we were talking about earlier. You can't buy 80 acres for $1 million anymore. the numbers are
Not
just,
around here.
they're just so much bigger. And I think that's what scares people. With risk comes reward. Just don't get overextended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty. When numbers get big, they get scary, right? Numbers are pretty big. And that's even comparing to 2021 numbers in terms of land values and really everything. It's just the more zeros that get added or the more commas that get added, it feels like the decision has more magnitude because ultimately it does.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a hard thing for someone to really realize, because I always have the thought, it's like for the stock market, for example, it's like people don't remember when, like, back in 1999, the S&P 500 was $700 and now it's whatever. Like, I feel like with land, it is so easy to associate that with, where it's like, oh, I remember that sold in 1990 for $2,000 an acre and now it is sold again for $14,000. Like, it's just so much easier for people to understand that because it's tangible and they can see it, and it's a lot easier to follow or remember, in my opinion.
Well, and I know maybe this is a good time as any that you had seen a land calculator that I had put up, right? So, for the listeners, if you look at what land costs today, or, let's say end of 2025, and let's say it was, $15,000 an acre in 2025. And then you go back to 2000 and say, well, what was it in the year 2000? Maybe it's 2,500, maybe it's 3,000. If you take and do the reverse amortization on that and you look at what that percentage increase is, let's say it's 8%, 10%, 12%, whatever, the question you have to ask yourself is, what if that continues? And history tells us that it will, or that it has. And I'll get back to some of the debasement outlook there, but let's say we go to 2050, what's land going to be? Well, if you extrapolate the last 25 years and you move that forward, that points to 80,000, 90,000 an acre. I mean, how do you feel about those numbers? That's a lot of zeros.
Makes you want to own something now.
And that's what we're seeing. A really smart gentleman, Jim Urio, he talks on macroeconomics. He presented at the conference and he says, we're living in a K economy. Asset holders are increasing dramatically and everybody else is falling off.
Yeah.
And where are you at in that spectrum?
You have to own assets now.
You have to.
It's
I mean,
the only way to keep up.
Gold's gone to $5,000 an ounce as we sit here today. Silver's sitting at 110. Those are parabolic increases over the last 3 years. Inflation's transitory, by the way. You go back 2020, 2021. Some other interesting data that we've done with farm operations is looking at what inflation and depreciation has done over a period of time. So we've measured this for 15 years. When you look at 2021 to today, here, the end of 25 or beginning of 2026, a piece of machinery in 2020, that same unit, that same style of tractor, same horsepower, whatever, is 41.5% more expensive than it was in 2020. So you have a $500,000 tractor or combine or whatever it is in 2020 is now all of a sudden $750,000.
Yeah.
That's hard to wrap your mind around. And it's happened in real time.
Yeah.
Just quietly.
Does the equipment upgrades really make sense I'm not a farmer. So, like, it seems like, man, you could probably do that job for not a $500,000 tractor or a $700,000 tractor. Like, could you buy something from 1990 that is 80 or 90? I don't know. Like, I'm completely ignorant, but I feel like from an outsider looking in, it's like, do you really have to have $1 million combine to pick corn?
So I'll provide some perspective on it, and then I'll answer it like how I think about it in our operation. One of the gentlemen that we work with, he's one of the top equipment salesmen for John Deere in the country. Great guy. And him and the consultant that I work with, Chris, they were talking through what did a combine cost in 1995 versus how many bushels were going through that combine. Okay. So that's one metric. And when you take that 1995, that same combine, you buy it brand new for 70,000 or whatever it was. Well, it might have been putting 80,000, 100,000 bushels through the system. Now you fast forward and you go to the new X9s or class 10, class 11 combines, and they're like 1.2 million. Okay. Well, that $1.2 million combine is now pushing 1.5 million bushels through it or 1.8 million bushels through it. So on a cost per bushel basis, you're about neck and neck, which is super interesting. The other thing that we've tracked that's kind of interesting when you look at that is a brand new home build is roughly been equivalent to the cost of a combine over time. So you look at brand new home builds today, and you probably have some friends or people that that have built, you're $700 to $1.1 million to build a house. You can buy a combine for that. So it's I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's good math or, like good science or whatever, but it is kind of interesting to track.
So this is you need to do this study for Twitter. You need to go borrow a combine from 1995 on one of your fields,
Yeah.
80 and 80, use a 1995 combine and get the yield data, and then one with the brand new one and see how efficient that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm completely ignorant to this topic
Yeah.
too. So I'm just
No, it's a great question. and it leads into my second answer. So is it going to pick the corn the same? Yes. Are you going to be within 1 bushel of like yield loss? Yes. What amount of time does it take you to do that? Because you're now covering way more acres on average versus what the average farmer was in 1995. And what's your willingness to fix and work on equipment versus what stays under warranty? Mm-hmm. And so the operations that we work with that trade every year or every couple of years, maybe on a program or whatever, they're staying under warranty because they can't afford downtime. Mm-hmm. So they need to have someone there to fix it. They need to have the equipment dealership support behind them. And actually, when the cost of money was so low, there were some really favorable leases out there from like 2019 to 2022. That's when we started to see them kind of fall off, to where you could actually lease equipment for cheaper than owning equipment. Mm-hmm. And as we sit here today, coming off of 24 or 25, not much equipment is being sold. There's a lot more on the dealer lot. So we've seen some rental opportunities for guys to go out and rent a tractor for the fall or for, planting or whatever. But that arbitrage right now is very interesting. And what I was going to answer is the second part of that question. My personal outlook, what I've decided is I need to be the low cost producer. It doesn't mean low yields. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that I'm not writing money for the inputs and trying to maximize yield. But as far as equipment goes, our average age of equipment right now, I think is like 2008. Mm-hmm. So it's 18 years old. And you sit there and look at it and you're like, well, yeah, my tractors are 2005, 2006. My combine's 2013, maybe some newer, support equipment or whatever else. But I can't afford that. I can't justify it on a per bushel basis. And as a, relatively smaller farm operation, compared to some of these other units that are running out there, that's just a decision that we've had to make internally. And I think that's the way forward, because there's a lot of scary stuff when you start looking at those bigger numbers on, what are you writing checks for equipment? What are you writing checks for land? I think I'm going to take my cash and not sink it into equipment that's depreciating at 15 to 25% annually.
Tough to get ahead of that. Because it's just always, it's like I said, I'm ignorant to it and I understand. Okay. So the speed, I mentioned breakdowns and everything else. This is for you, if you had perfect conditions from the moment you started picking beans or corn to the very end of harvest, how fast are you doing it now? And then the other side of that question is, if you had all the newest equipment, like, is it days? Is it weeks?
Yeah.
Difference.
So let's say a farm operation is 2,000 acres. They can probably harvest in perfect conditions if they're 50-50 rotation between corn and soybeans in 5 weeks. So maybe they start September in this area, they start September 15th. And they're going to be done by November 1st, 5-6 weeks, whatever. If you're doing that with older equipment, you might be lucky to be done by Thanksgiving, so 40% longer. And that's if conditions are perfect. Now you start looking at the window on the back end, and that's where people get nervous. Like, I've cut beans on Thanksgiving. Yeah. That's not fun. and I know guys that pick corn in December. That's not fun either.
Yeah. How much crop loss is having to wait that, let's say, picking beans on Thanksgiving versus picking beans October 1st?
It depends on what the moisture of the soybeans is. So 24, 25, we saw soybeans dry down super fast. When you go from 13.5% soybeans, which is kind of like target moisture, down to 9.5%, you lose 3.5 bushels just in water weight. So if you can maintain 13.5% into Thanksgiving, it doesn't really matter. Whereas, we had guys September 25th that were cutting 9% soybeans. It's like, that kind of hurts your pocketbook a little bit. Yeah. Corn it's more loss, and then it's perfect, and then it's more loss. It's kind of like this curve, right? So you have more loss when you have wet corn because it shells off the cob a little bit harder. You might have more coming out the back end, just the amount of crop residue that you're putting through if the plant's a little bit green yet. Kind of get to this sweet spot in that 20 to 22% where it shells really easily. It's coming off. Plant matter's died back. So you're looking at maybe 1 to 3 bushel loss an acre. And then when you get real dry or you get late into the season, you start having plants that are falling over, you get ears that are dropping, you get shelling that's coming out the back where, the corn gets down to 14% and it almost gets slippery. So then you start kicking stuff out the back. So I mean, the harvestability has real dollars, and the best way to raise a good crop in the following year is to be timely with your harvest the year before.
Why is that?
Because you can get tillage done. You can get nitrogen on. You can get your cover crops down in better shape. And it seems counterintuitive. You're like, well, that shouldn't matter or whatever. It's a whole new year, but it really does. And we've seen, it scares me a little bit, honestly, for 2026, because 2025 conditions were like perfect for harvest. Guys were done in 5 weeks, 6 weeks. They got all their tillage done. They got all their nitrogen on. It's like, man, if we did that, you're going to raise a scary good crop next year too.
More oversupply.
Unless we find demand or weather issue or whatever. And again, like I said, I forgot my crystal ball today, so I don't know what's gonna happen. And it's not a doom and gloom outlook. People are kind of feeling that way right now. I think the media has overhyped it a little bit, but there's opportunity.
Buck Land Funding. If you don't know who they are and you're looking to buy a piece of ground, I encourage you to reach out to them. They're chartered in multiple states across the Midwest, and they understand recreational land. I've said it a million times here on the podcast. The most important piece of buying your first piece of ground is finding a partner, finding a bank that understands what you're trying to do, that has competitive rates and understands the world of recreational land, because not all banks are created equal, and Buck Land Funding understands our crazy goals of scooping up a piece of ground to enjoy it with family, to hunt it, to use it as an investment. They understand that and work with that every single day. I encourage you to reach out to them. If you're in the process of buying your first or 20th farm, reach out to Buck Land Funding at bucklandfunding.com. Back to the conversation.
I somehow ended up on farming Twitter, and that is a depressing place to be.
You got to come over to my side of farming
Okay,
Twitter. We look at decision making. We share fun photos.
It's just the For You side. And so I don't even follow any of these people, and everyone's just, oh my gosh, dang, man.
Yeah. I think you definitely don't go on to the Facebook grain market discussions, because
I'm not anywhere close to that.
Garbage in, garbage out, right? So I think it's surrounding yourself with the people that care about, deer hunting and deer management, timber management, land. It's the same way. You get around the right people.
We nag a lot too. So
yeah.
We're not much better. We're probably not any better.
People like to complain.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we could all take a time to reflect and realize how thankful we really should be for all the different things that life's a lot better than what we often want to focus on in terms of the negativity. But looping back to the appreciation of land value, and you had mentioned, the balance sheets of some of these farmers that bought ground, and, it didn't pencil out then, but over time it tends to make more sense. For you yourself, I feel that, how do you feel about traditional retirement, traditional investing instead of growing the farming operation? Is that a battle that you ever face?
I like cash and I like investments personally. So I think that's a big part of it. From land though, and I had a guy talking on Bitcoin, and I think there's huge opportunities on the Bitcoin side of things. And if, we ever move over to that standard, it's going to be really interesting on the impacts that it has on land.
What impacts do you think there would be?
Hang on, I'll get there. Okay, there's a little bit more to chew on. I'll say this though, it's hard to farm Bitcoin, right? It's hard to put your toes in Bitcoin. It's hard to pass that on to kids and have value and meaning and substance and purpose. And I think there's a lot more to that than what society has maybe given credit to over the last 20 or 30 years. And I think we feel it in a lot of different ways in our culture of reject modernity, embrace tradition, right? And I think when you go back to owning land, having things that you can value and touch and pass on from a legacy and traditional standpoint, there's more than you can ever put on your balance sheet there. So that's my personal belief. Now, to go back to the Bitcoin thing, again, you get with someone like Vance Crowe and look at what could happen if you move to a Bitcoin standard. You have a separation from the dollar, which right now we're still very closely tied to that. Does land go back to its utility value of what it can actually produce? Because right now you can't produce enough corn and soybeans to make those principal and interest payments. Not even close. I mean, you're looking at maybe $50 an acre profit on average for 2026. And you got $1,000 an acre land payment and, principal and interest. That math doesn't math unless you have the balance sheet appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, what does that do long term?
So the thesis is if Bitcoin becomes the currency, a potential land crash could happen is his thesis.
That's part of the thesis. And it's not they don't frame it as a land crash. They frame it as it goes back to its utility value.
Well, it would be a crash though.
What can you produce off of that? It'd shock rural communities, it'd shock balance sheets. It'd be pretty huge.
Yeah, I'm not smart enough to have a strong opinion on that, but I don't.
You know what I believe in? I believe in strong opinions loosely held. So I'm going to have a strong opinion about it until all of a sudden someone tells me otherwise. No, and I'm the same way. I'm not smart enough to fully understand the implications of it, but it is interesting to think about. Here's the example. Okay, so why have land prices continued to increase? Because it's been a safe haven for investments. It's taking volatility out of these large fund managers. They can buy land, even if it doesn't have the same return from either an appreciation standpoint or even a cap rate, 2.5% maybe, depending on the valuation of some of this land is pretty steep for some of the cash rents that are out there. Okay, so you figure in maybe 6.5% to 7% appreciation happening on the back end with a 2.5% cap rate. Okay, so you're looking at 10% on your investment, and that's not dollars and cents on your cash flow. That's your balance sheet, long-term appreciation. What's Bitcoin done over the last 10 years?
Oh, it's crushed.
It's 1,000%. Mm-hmm. So at what point, when you start having a stable coin base, do these large investors look at it and say, why are we spending any money on land when you're looking at 1,000%, even if it's 10%, you're looking at 100% return from a Bitcoin investment. So it's going to flatline or drive prices down, maybe stabilize prices. Mm-hmm. And now who are your buyers? Farmers, landowners, managers, people that want it. So now you start working backwards towards utility value of the land. Likewise, the big thing that's happening, and I want people to really pay attention to this, if we have tens of millions of acres, and it's more than that are going to change hands in the next 20 years, and these are 80 and 90-year-old parents that are passing away, the land is going to their... Oh, sorry, Siri. There's land. Here, I'll pause for a second. So you have this tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of acres that are going to be changing hands. Now you're looking at land for the new owner that's maybe in their 60s or 70s. They're at a different point in their life than their parents or grandparents who bought their land. They need cash. And they're looking at the investment side and saying, okay, I can rent it to Shay and get a 2.5% return rate, maybe a 6% appreciation on the back end, or I can sell this crap and go invest it and get 50% or 100% return in something like Bitcoin. Who's buying this land? Who has the hundreds of millions of dollars to make it? I mean, you just look in our county here. There's billions of dollars of land in the county. Mm-hmm. Where is that capital coming from to make the purchase on row crops that are negative margin?
Mm-hmm. Do you think on the flip side of that, though, there's only so many high quality acres in the country?
Sure.
And there's large capital that, recognizes like Bitcoin is built off of scarcity, and we know exactly what it is. There's 21 million coins.
Yep.
Well, we know how many like highly productive acres there are, and it goes down.
Yep.
And so I could see a counter argument of that pretty easily. But you're right. I sell land for a living, so like this area, typically land does not change hands a bunch. Mm-hmm. So if there is an oversupply to some period, I could see some form of. I think there's a firm floor for land, in my opinion.
And is that 30% of today's market value? Is it 50? 100% of today's market? I don't know.
My opinion is probably 30.
Yeah, and so I don't say this to scare people because I agree 100% with what you said. Where we sit here today, Northwest Illinois, truly
90% of Illinois is Central Illinois. You gotta pick that up.
So, some of the most productive land in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Truly. I mean, we have the rainfall, we have the quality of soil, we have the organic matter, we have the ability to produce. If we wanted to grow plums, we could grow plums. If we wanted to grow cherries, we can grow cherries. We just choose to grow corn and soybeans. You start looking at the marginal value with a reduction of something like that. We are best positioned, us and like the Valley of California and a few other areas across the United States, for high quality land purchase, good management, and the producers that know what to do with that land long term. So I don't disagree with you from that standpoint, but it is kind of interesting to look at where is your value today. And I'm always a fan of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the reality is today, land is increasing in value. It's a scarce resource. We're based off of the dollar. That's what we're at today. That's where I think people should be making their decisions. However, I also think you should look at what are the long-term implications of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fan of owning land. I'm a fan of cash investments. I think you do both. And I think for the people that don't own land, you're at a disadvantage to anybody that owns land. In any size of parcel, if that's 15 acres of timber, mixed use, somewhere that's further away from home, maybe you build on it. The absolute best way to grow up and how we're raising our kids is in the country on land that we own, with the ability for them to run and play and feel it and value it. I mean, I can't put a dollar amount on that.
No, I would completely agree with that. Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. I always like doing that.
Yeah.
I give you $10 million.
Yes.
Bitcoin's been so great, Shay. Why don't you put all $10 million into Bitcoin, or 80%? Are you going to do that?
I wouldn't do that with any investment.
Well, what are you going to do? You have to allocate it.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you buckets to allocate this to.
Okay.
Farm ground.
Yep.
Bitcoin, S&P 500. You have to deploy every dollar. You have 10 seconds. Go.
30, 30, 40.
Okay, what's the 40?
S&P.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to do index, low index mutual funds. That's going to be my retirement.
Yeah.
And my kids' legacy and wealth there.
Uh-huh.
So that's 40% there, 30% into Bitcoin, 30% into land.
I'm surprised you're not more bullish on land, given what you do for a living.
It's not that I'm not bullish on it. I think there's just maybe a little bit more uncertainty there versus the performance of the stock market. I mean, we have such a long track record of that. And again, we had, major sell-offs, 30s, 80s, 2008. Not saying there's not implications there, but man, this interest rate thing is just interesting from a parabolic standpoint. You got 13% of the index is held up by technology companies, and the rate at which that's developing, that's unprecedented. We haven't seen that. So I don't know, maybe I'm weighted a little too heavily that way.
Well, I don't have $10 million.
Something for. I thought that was the per diem for the podcast here.
Yeah. Do you set up a $10 million year payment plan? I could.
Yeah, yeah, right. That's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah, I'm surprised you're not more bullish.
What's your breakdown?
Candidly, I would probably buy $10 million worth of land.
Interesting.
Because at that point, you're going to have cash rent, you're going to have income. At that rate, it'd probably be a headache to manage all of that land. That would be a job in itself. But at the end of the day, we all die, and you'd be extremely wealthy.
So all right, this is interesting. I'll play off of this. How many acres are you buying for $10 million here locally?
Not as much as you'd think. I'm going to say it'd be a mixed bag. So I'm going to say the sad part is $10 million is not that much money.
I know.
So if you had $10 million and you did put it all in the S&P 500, you could live on $300,000 a year pretty comfortably. Like, you would be able to have that withdrawal rate and still have your account grow.
Yeah,
and
sure.
so land, I'm still going to work because I like working. And
You're not answering the question.
1,500 to 2,000 acres.
I think it's less than that. Where we sit today, I think you're buying 700 acres. You're buying 1 square mile. Or a little bit more than that.
I'm not a farmer, Shay, so
okay.
I'm not buying all farm.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. No, that's a good point.
Let's say.
Sorry, I got my farmer hat on over here. So
we'll use $7,500 an acre as an average. So you're buying 1,333 acres.
So you're buying 2 square miles.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your rent going to be off that? Because that's different than, again, straight farmland.
So let's say 35% of it's tillable. So that's 465 acres. How much are you going to pay for cash rents? 115 PI, not very good, kind of cut up.
270.
Okay. So $125,000 a year in cash rent.
Okay.
I'm good.
You're good?
I'm good.
Versus the 300 for the S&P?
Yeah, I would, if if I had active income, it would just go towards buying more land or enjoying it.
Okay. So here's my point then. If I were to take $10 million and buy land, I'm not buying 1,300 acres. I'm going to use that 10 million as a down payment. I'm going to acquire much more.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and buy 3,000 or 4,000. I would probably look at it personally a little bit more strategically and say, where can I buy land that I can 1031 later? Whereas arbitrage, I think the people that are living in Kansas right now and just had a bang up year, and people are going to throw rocks at me because they're like, oh yeah, we've had 5 years of just, nothing but drought. They had a bang up year. Land prices $2,100 to $3,500 an acre out there.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to see $10,000 an acre land in our lifetime.
Well, we're going to see 80 or 90,000.
Probably.
But based off your calculator.
Well, there's data center land right now that's being sold by the square inch.
Yeah.
I know of one in Indiana, $300,000 an acre.
Yeah.
Those are big boy dollars there.
Yeah.
So, I just say that again from a little bit of perspective of, I wouldn't put my eggs all in one basket. I love your enthusiasm. I love your love for land, and I think there's a place for it. And honestly, I think your audience probably would.
No, I think a lot of people disagree with me.
Yeah, I think they're going to skew more towards what I'm saying, but I think those people that are going to take your make believe $10 million monopoly money are looking at 30% and being like, well, 30% is a hell of a lot higher than the 0% that I'm doing currently.
Yeah.
And should look at that and say, I should be investing in land, and I should be investing in more land, and I should be buying multi-use properties for my kids and investments and strategic outlook. And maybe it's timber and maybe it's hunting, and have an opportunity for their kids to be involved long-term. I think those are probably the people. Well, I know the people that would listen, like my podcast, our audience, they're looking at that and they're like, you know what? You're right.
Yeah. I
should be spending more money on land.
Yeah. I still feel confident. 125 grand cash rent. I'm still going to work. I'd be bored to death if I didn't work. So it's like, that's just.
And I'll use this example. So there's a program called the Executive Producers in Agriculture Program, TPAP. Texas A&M has put it on. It's probably one of the premier programs for people to go attend from an executive business minded decision. Ours is second to that. But right there's some differences and some modeling there. There's a gentleman there that in the state of Missouri and some surrounding areas, family owned 8,000 acres. They decided we're not going to farm. We're going to become a land manager. Well, now he's managing all that land. That's a full-time job.
It is.
And it's got rental income and, whatever else. So I don't disagree with you. I think that's probably a small percentage, but it's fun to play with monopoly money. So I like the exercise.
It's always fun to dream, right?
Yeah.
What's the point of living if you don't dream a little bit? What's one question landowners should ask themselves every year, but most people aren't?
How can I best serve my tenants? If I'm your tenant and you're my landowner, you're my customer. Mm-hmm. But guess what? I'm your customer too. Mm-hmm. And I think for the wealth that I'm managing as a tenant for you, I think sometimes landowners have the opportunity of, well, I want to collect my rental income. I want to, it's a mixed use property. I want to hunt and whatever you do with. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. And I think there's so much more opportunity for people that are landowners working with tenants to develop a strategic relationship, to check in. How are things going? What can I do for you? Do you need, do we need some investments? Do you need more tile? That conversation, as I alluded to earlier, because people don't ask those types of questions, it like stands out and slaps you in the face. Mm-hmm. You're like, wow. Jake's my land. He really cares. Yeah. He cares about me.
For most people, it's the most valuable asset, and it's not treated as such.
Nope.
Oftentimes.
Yeah. I mean, if someone was, a general contractor on your home and they were working on it, all throughout the year, you'd be, hey, what are you doing? How can I help you? And I'm not saying micromanage.
Yeah.
I'm saying have a relationship. Understand, what do they value? How can they improve your land? How can you work together? And guess what? That tenant, if they're treating your land right and they're doing a good job and, they're thinking about the long term for your legacy, there's probably other opportunities there. For you to go out and buy, you're going to take your 30% of 10 million, you're going to go out and buy a bunch of land. Guess what? That's the tenant that you want there.
Yeah.
And if that's not the tenant that you currently have, you should probably find a tenant that does that for you.
Yeah, I had a mentor say in terms of the cash rent side of things, like whoever pays the most is not necessarily the best because of the fact they can mine all the fertility and they treat the farm poorly, and then you're left trying to fix an issue for however long it takes to do that. So
Mhm.
I feel, it's weird because farming is a business, but it's often not viewed as a business. And maybe that's just my outside perspective. Do you have a comment from my naive perspective?
I think it's probably the 80-20 rule that 20% treat it like the business as it needs to be, and 80% probably don't.
Mm-hmm.
The 20% that do are going to be farming 80% of the land if they're not today.
Yeah.
And, that's where some of these huge amounts of land that's going to be changing hands, and some of the opportunities that are kind of coming up today of people that call us and talk to us on the consulting side, the opportunities are so much bigger. It's not, hey, do you want to pick up 80 or 160? It's 500, 1,000, 2,000 acres, because about 45% of people that farm don't have a transition plan in place. So now you have a 2,000 acre row crop operation. Kids didn't want to come back. They're not exactly sure what to do. We own a good chunk of it, have a good relationship with the others, the 500 acres that we rent or whatever. We're going to move that to one tenant. Mm-hmm. And so now the farm operation is picking up 2,000 acres, like entire operations at a time. Those operators that are treating it like a business, they have the characteristics of a tenant that you want, and they're ready to take that opportunity. They're running the numbers. They're buying land. Mm-hmm. They're making strategic decisions on equipment analysis. Those are the operations that we get the opportunity to work with, that are seeking out, consulting services. How do we do this? How do we dial in cost of production? How do we network with other people that have been there, done that, been successful? So I'm a little bit more biased to think that there's maybe more operations like that out there than there are, but it's still a huge percent that are maybe not looking at it like they should. And unfortunately, with these tougher economic environments, you're going to start to see that more and more.
Last question, because I feel like a lot of my listeners are first-time landlords.
Yeah.
How do they be a good landlord to a farmer? Because I'm picturing a lot of farms I've sold and just people I talk with, it's not prime farm ground 99% of the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of cut up, kind of awkward sized fields, a lot of timber edges. How can I, as a guy that bought a piece of ground and I want to have a farmer come in, I want him to leave, 3 acres of corn, or 3 acres of beans, and I don't want you to work the field in the fall. What do you want the people that listen to this to know from your perspective?
Just good communication. Because if you're the landowner that wants to do those things, and I come in as a tenant and I say, hey, I want to work with you, and you say, okay, great, sounds good. Cash rent's going to be $270 an acre. I say, okay, great. Well, that's my expectation if nothing else is said. Mm-hmm. So the arbitrage is when unmet expectations meet reality. So if you're like, oh, well, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, and I want you to do this, and I don't know it, and then now all of a sudden you call me pissed off in October because I went in and worked and I didn't leave you any corn. It's like, where's this coming from? I didn't know. So just having communication, and I really think having a professional outlook. So one thing that I've put together for the landowners that we work with is a calendar. And I say, this is what goes on throughout the year. In January, I'm prepaying for chemicals. I'm making seed plans, variable rate populations, whatever else. February comes around, I'm getting equipment prepped. I'm making sure tillage stuff is ready to go. Getting tractors fine-tuned, and we have all of our plans finalized. March, we're going to be doing crop protection, maybe some field preparation, maybe some early planting on, small grains or whatever. And then April's go time, and, May's crop protection. And then, you just kind of map that out all throughout the year, and it gives you insight into what I'm thinking about as a business owner and manager, and how I handle that you might have never been exposed to. And so you just ask for that. And then likewise, I would say, hey, Jake, can you do the same thing for me? What do you want to be doing throughout the year? You're like, oh, well, I got to go.
October, November, get in and out as fast as possible.
Please leave.
Don't go scouting all your crops 5 times a week.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, that's good for me to know. It doesn't mean I can facilitate that, because weather and the crop needs to get out. And we need to, do field preparation and stuff like that. But it's good for me to know what your expectations are. It's really good for you to know what I'm doing as a farmer. Mm-hmm. And then, how do we work through that? I have tenants as an example. I just providing this for, the listeners, because I think they might get value out of it. There's some landowners that we work with that we pay them a monthly cash rent. and they're on a fixed income and they don't want to check in January and June, it's like, hey, I'll cut you a check for, $1,500, $3,000, whatever it is every single month. And then you're happy because you got money coming in and it's stable. We got a good relationship for communication. Or maybe we have a flex lease and then I say, hey, once we get all the crops in December 10th, let's have a meeting. If we have profit sharing because we had a great year, I'm going to write you a bonus check. You're going to be happy. I'm going to be happy. We'll look at pictures of all the deer that you got this year or whatever. So I think that communication is key and understanding what your values are. I was going to give this to you. So American Family Farmland, Johnny Clemmy, he's out of Indiana. And essentially the book looks at what are your values, as a landowner, what are my values as a tenant? And then how do we find that medium ground? And I think, you can buy that on Amazon. It's like $17 or something. It's a phenomenal book and a phenomenal resource for the first time landowner or for the people that inherit land that have never managed it before. And you really have to think about what are my value? Why do I value this land? It's more than just the dollars, but it might mean something different to me than it does to my brother or my sister. How do we work through all that together? So communication, set those expectations. And I think there's so much potential even today for the landowners that people are working with, or, if they're a landowner that's working with multiple tenants, there's huge opportunities to leverage there. And, I'm excited. I'm excited for the outlook of agriculture. I think it's not all doom and gloom. There's opportunities. I think land is going to be a good investment in the short term. I think there's great opportunity to buy land and have some of those intangible things, and excited to see what you're doing. I think it's fantastic.
Appreciate it. Well, no, I certainly appreciate it. Where can people find all the different things that you have going on?
Yep. So the seed business is Monier Seed, Monier. And we do lots of work for, the deer hunters and people that want to put out food plots and stuff like that. And we do it in a way that it works for us, and it's not going to be, killer prices like some of this other crazy stuff that's out there. So monierseed.com. My phone number is 309-264-3090. So if you're looking at, transition planning or land management or cost of production analysis, and then agviewsolutions.com, agviewsolutions.com, that's the consulting work that we do. I'm on X, Foulk Shay, so I love the X side. You need to come over to the good side of farmer Twitter.
I need to stop clicking on the bad parts because they keep giving me more.
Reset the algorithm.
Yeah.
But no, and we do a podcast, AgView Pitch, that we talk on farmer side. So there's a lot of different places. And if anybody wants to reach out, I'm happy to connect and kind of talk through whatever their situation is. So.
Awesome. Well, Shay, I certainly appreciate it. We're recording this here at your facility, and always a pleasure. And call Shay and tell him how dumb I am. I'm spending all the money on land.
No, you're a smart deer farmer. Don't let anybody tell you different.